Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. The deployment of population-scale digital public infrastructure is gaining traction worldwide. Now, India has deployed state-of-the-art DPI. DPI stands for Digital Public Infrastructure, and it's deployed it in areas such as identity, payments, data exchange systems, and it's been using the G20 presidency to champion its digital public infrastructure and push for global adoption of such initiatives. Now, I'm Bharath Reddy, and to talk with me about why there's so much focus on DPI in the G20 agenda, I have with me my colleague Saurabh Todi and my ex-colleague Ritul Gaur. Now, Ritul is now a project fellow at the International Innovation Corps, and he works with METI. So welcome, Saurabh and Ritul.
Hi, Bharat.
Yeah, so let's get started. So just to set some context about what DPI is and how it's benefited India. So India's DPI, when I say DPI, it means digital public infrastructure, and this includes things like UPI, Aadhaar, and these have enabled the efficient delivery of government services. Now, it is widely acknowledged that it's a necessary and cost-effective intervention to fast-track the sustainable development goals. And these are they make a very big difference for developing countries. They help us leapfrog other, much more time-consuming pathways to achieve these goals. So, for example, the Bank of International Settlements has recognized that India's use of DPI has accelerated financial inclusion outcomes by around 4 decades, which is a huge, achievement in such a short span of time. So, when you look at the G20 presidency and India is trying to showcase its DPI, so what are the main reasons or the objectives of this push? So, to talk about this, I will first ask Ritul to join in, and then maybe Saurabh can pitch in. Ritul, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Bharat. Thank you for this opportunity. I would actually like to start by adding to what you said, that it helps in the delivery of government services. I believe while it does that, and that essentially was the reason why India built these population-scale digital public infrastructure in the first place, but I think it goes beyond that now. And in fact, the role of government is very limited in just laying the protocol per se, or laying the broad guidelines or rules, regulation, laws, etc. that these DPIs need to play around. But the real magic happens when you get open API, when you get private sector to come and innovate on it, when you get private players innovating on top of it. So I think private sector and innovation is a big component, and that ecosystem that it churns, we often tend to miss out. That's precisely what accelerates your progress in digital economy. The 2.4% that the RBI number, that the Indian digital economy grew 2.5% more than its the normal economy. I think it's because of the DPI fueled innovation that has built on, which has, of course, the government service is one key aspect of it, but I think it goes beyond. Now, to come back to why India has prioritized it, I think it is genuinely in India's interest to showcase its prowess on something that it has done so well. And this is also a very opportune moment for India to put out an agenda where we cannot not just exert that what we've done, but at the same time, we can exert thought leadership on it. Because to be honest, there is very little literature on digital public infrastructure, very little global literature on digital public infrastructure. There are very little interoperable standards across the world. There are very little frameworks, principles, etc. on digital public infrastructure. So I think it's a very opportune moment for India to take what they've done at a global level, and what better than to chair the G20 presidency. So rightly, I think with what we've done and the stage we've gotten, I think we've sort of hit the nail right with this opportunity. And also this fits into the larger development agenda. I mean, we're running short of time. We've lost 2 years due to COVID and only 7 years left for SDGs. And what better tool to accelerate progress towards SDG than digital public infrastructure, financial inclusion, digital payments, data exchange, giving people their land rights, giving people digital IDs. I think just the whole potential of this solution is so much, and of course, like demonstrated by COVID, that this is a kind of solution which is out there for globally the world to adopt. So I think like all streams converging into it sort of fits like that. This is a very right moment for India to project it at a global stage and exert thought leadership.
Saurabh, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I think, I completely agree with what Ritul said. And I think this aim and ambition and, this confidence that we have a world-class technology in an ecosystem that has really played a key role in improving lives of many Indians. And then we feel very confident that we can do that for our partners globally. So if you see like the G20 summit that India is hosting this year, you see that, like making sure that like DPI is one of the major areas of focus of India's G20 presidency. And it is because, G20 is a forum where all the 20 major economies of the world can come together. They can talk, they can discuss. So it is one platform where you can showcase, India's success. And especially among the countries, who would be most likely to take up India's experience are the countries of the Global South. So the Voice of the Global South Summit, which India convened in January this year, it did recognize the importance of digital public infrastructure as one of the things, which can be used by the countries of the Global South. And you see that during COVID, the India's CoWIN platform, right, which was the platform which was used to, make sure that the vaccines were being tracked. There was a vaccine certificate. You could verify it online and all things like that. And the vaccine, storage, distribution, all of those things were being done on this platform called CoWIN. And this was then, exported or was exported to many countries and a few countries also, they did deploy this system for their own use. So this shows, that Ritul said that India has the capability, and as it is shown by its confidence for the G20 and then the Global South Summit, that it also has the ambition. Now we have to see that, how this kind of plays out and how, G20 meeting kind of sets the ball rolling on this. So let's see what happens.
Right. So basically we have implemented all of these things. So we have the expertise, and considering everyone else is trying to do it, it's an opportune moment for us to, export this technology to the other countries. But in doing so, is there gains for the other countries adopting it, which allow them to, achieve those same development goals faster? But is there also something that India stands to gain from exporting its DPI globally? And if so, what are those gains?
Yeah, no, I think there are tangible gains. I think the fact that the very simple gain here is that India gets to be at the center of things. And this is genuinely India's moment to lead in this. This is genuinely India's moment to build principles, to build frameworks, to build global, theorize it in a way that it's adopted globally, that this is the model, this is how you do it. So, of course, thought leadership is one way to it. And the fact that if countries are going to look up to that, these solutions are, and of course, a lot of these solutions are open, interoperable, etc. So this is not like a proprietary solution that India is trying to sell so that you have to come to India for a vendor lock-in. But you have to understand that when you are sort of deploying a population scale DPI, there is much more nuance than just the tech. So you have to deploy it till the last mile, till the last person gets it. And in order to deploy, you need to get the regulation right. So I think taking all of this into entirety, India has, and who in the world knows how to do all this for a population of 1.5 billion? So this is where India generally has an opportunity, where India's human resource, and particularly a lot of people who worked in the early stages of building these digital public infrastructure. I personally know that iSPIT as a think tank, their alumni is just so much in demand all across the world. Embassies want them to understand DPI. Companies want them. Open source communities are looking for them. So it's just amazing that this small group of people are so globally recognized and wanted. So of course, and India has more people who can do it. At the same time, regulators, think tanks in India know how to govern, how to build governance framework for, let's say, a unique digital ID, which has sensitive information like your biometric, etc. So even the governance itself is such a nuanced thing. So think tanks in India, government entities in India know how to do it. So they can be of great help to who are looking to implement this. And of course, the government entities that have built these DPIs in the first place. So let's say if it's METI, if it's Aadhaar, if it's NPCI, their alumni is in huge demand that can you come up and set up a payment system in? And this has already been happening. As a matter of fact, Morocco, Philippines, who are developing digital IDs, which are very similar to Aadhaar, they come to India to visit what Aadhaar has been able to do, clarify their doubts, study the Aadhaar Act 2016, and that is how the deployment is working. So I think there is evidently a lot that India can gain from. And then just this whole big transformative thing puts India at the center of things that are going to happen. And I'm saying it at the risk of repeating myself. It puts India at the center of things when we are in real crisis and we need like a transformative approach to attain these SDGs. So for the next 7 years, the world is really going to push a lot on sustainable development goals, and which is the most quick, easy, safe, secure, scalable solution that is available out there, and that is India's. So the world is going to look up to India, and I think with this, we've got the opportunity right, and there's a lot to gain.
Right. Saurabh, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, if you think about, what are the things that India can do, like tangible things that India can do. So for example, there is immense potential for India to then collaborate with its partners in Quad and G20 to then kind of implement DPI in the global South countries. So for example, India and Australia have this like very growing and deep partnership. It has improved by leaps and bounds over the last few years. And being a member of the Quad, this interaction and this deepening is only expected to grow. So can, we think about the possibility that India and Australia, for example, collaborate on, building and introducing and training the countries of the Pacific Island states for DPI. So, India can bring its expertise and its technology, which can be then coupled with the investments that Australia does in the region, for just general growth and development of its neighbors. So that's one. And second, for example, India can, both independently and with partners like US, can work with multilateral institutions like IMF or the World Bank to kind of include promotion of DPIs in the kind of, in the plans that these institutions develop for countries, especially the ones which need help. So I think in this way, avenues for financing can be taken care by World Bank and IMF, and technology can be given by India. And let's not forget that, a lot of the work that is being done on DPI is not, being done by the government per se. It is the private sector, the India Stack, and so many other players, which have been contributing relentlessly by innovation and by improvement. So this also kind of gives an opportunity for Indian companies to expand their footprint abroad. We have been lacking on that front a bit, but now that we have a great platform, a great product, I think it could be something that, the Indian tech ecosystem can have a chance to move out of the country and then implement new platforms, new technologies in other countries.
Bharath, if I can actually expand on this, some very good points there by Saurabh, that the fact that it provides an opportunity for Indian company, in fact, it is happening. You and I, like all of us know, Eager Foundation is what they are doing with exporting their DPIs, essentially DEVOC, the certificate, e-certificates, digital DPG is out there and it's being implemented in so many countries. Similarly with MOSIP, which is at the IIIT Bangalore, now that's being implemented in so many countries. And when it goes as a solution, of course, it has a lot of the biometric devices need to be made by some particular entity. Then you have your data center. So a lot of the original India stack was housed on Mindtree data centers, AWS, so which is okay, but Mindtree. So there is a lot for Indian companies also to expand out there. And another aspect is just capacity building. Like Indian government, non-government entities can just go out there and build capacity in these low middle income countries, global South countries, etc., and help the sort of roll out these DPIs. And another big opportunity that lies in front of India is standard setting, because today, India has a DPI and some other countries have DPI, but when these DPIs become global and more countries have these population scale DPI, we would look for interoperability between these digital public infrastructure. So standard setting will be a key element of who gets to get there first, so that who can define these standards. So I think if those standards are tweaked according to what Indian DPIs are, that'll be really beneficial for us. So all in all, I think this is, like, as Saurabh has already said, this is like a very good opportunity for India.
If I may add, I think even with the standard setting part, right, I think this is also a chance where, like usually India is an adopter of technology, right? Like we usually follow up because of XYZ reasons.
Absolutely.
So in DPI, for example, like we have a chance where we can be the first, we are the first mover. So we can be the ones who can shape these rules, regulation and standards. And then this then gives kind of an upper hand because we have the first mover advantage. So, that by itself also is a big plus.
Right. And to add, I think to what both of you have said, like in terms of interoperability, also there are some benefits to be had. For example, the UPI payment system has been integrated with Singapore's Pay Now system, and there could be cross-border payments which are possible at a much lower cost than what's possible now. So you can probably imagine as if a payment system like UPI is interoperable with the payment systems of other countries. You can imagine traveling to a foreign country and without any hassle of carrying foreign currency, you should be able to make payments. And these cross-border payments can get executed without paying, exorbitant markups on, to exchange currency and all of that. So that could also be a potential benefit of having such a broadly interoperable system. So now going forward, I think there have been some criticisms or shortcomings that have been about India's digital public infrastructure. So some of the criticisms are that all of this has been rolled out in the absence of a comprehensive data protection framework. And without that in place, all of the data that's being captured, whether it's your biometric information or all of the details through Aadhaar or through UPI, all of this, no guarantees on how the entities that are collecting this data are going to be using them, whether it's purpose limited, whether there's a minimization of this data that's being collected, and all of these concerns. There's also concerns around, finding sustainable funding models. For example, UPI was I think in the last financial year, it was subsidized to the tune of 2,100 crores, and which is a huge amount, right? And this primarily goes towards funding the expenses borne by the banks or NPCI. But there are other entities involved which are not, there are no incentives for them to innovate or to reduce any friction that exists or address grievances faced by customers or things like that. So probably, like Ritul was talking about, when you globalize and set standards for these things, those standards could also lead to improvement of some of the issues that we are facing. And maybe that could also lead to best practices coming back and being adopted back at home as well.
Yeah, if I also add, I think even in this case, for example, different countries have different standards of, let's say, privacy, right? Different countries would have different use cases. So I think the fact that because like DPI, these are platforms which are very flexible and then very open to being tweaked. So this allows a significant amount of flexibility for countries to adopt. So let's say if you are a country in Europe, your privacy imperatives are very different than what would be for a country somewhere else. Or at least the state capacity is different and whatnot. So I think that like the very open and flexible nature of DPI allows that kind of flexibility option to be there, which countries can then tweak according to what they want. And as you said rightly, I think that having a robust data protection and privacy ecosystem would be extremely helpful for a country or countries deploying DPI. And India has worked on that aspect. It's on its way to do that. But I think we should try to implement that faster because the use is just increasing exponentially each day.
Right.
I actually might have a thing or two to say here. I think the criticism is there and we all understand it, but we also have to look at it from where is the criticism coming from. A lot of this criticism comes from Western countries who do not essentially face the kind of developmental challenges that India faces, or let's say the Global South faces. Like today, before rolling out a digital ID program, the European countries can afford the luxury of just dabbling in what legislation should be what kind of rights should it be? Should it be fundamental rights? Should it be human rights? Should it be right-based DPI? They can, because they don't struggle with the problem of beneficiary leakages. They don't struggle with the problem of identification. They don't struggle with the problem of like a massive proportion of your population living under below poverty line. So India had certain challenges and it had to devise certain solutions. And in order to do that, we were doing what we could do best. And also, I think because India is like the first mover here, we've also learned on the go, like the calibration of laws, rules, regulations have happened on the go. The Aadhaar Act came in, then now the DPDP conversations are up, and almost we're very close to a legislation. And how many countries actually have a legislation which is except the GDPR? There are very few countries who have a data protection legislation. And not to forget, this is not just we as Indians saying, but I think the global community agrees that digital public goods and digital public infrastructures are fundamentally, inherently have a tech-based privacy by design principle. So the do no harm, the tech-based privacy by design principle is inherently coded in these protocols. How I look at safety, security, trust in digital public infrastructure is through a 3-layer structure. The base of it is the tech base, that which is privacy by design is embedded in the protocols. Then a layer above is a sectoral layer of data protection or sectoral layer of protection in that particular layer. So let's say for a digital ID, it could be the Aadhaar Act 2016, or for DEPA could be that for account aggregator, or it could be, I'm not sure DEPA probably is the right case, but for Payment and Settlements Act, for NPCI, UPI. So there could be sector specific legislation. And then there's the broad overarching legislation, which protects your fundamental rights, etc., which could be a DPDP, which says that, hey, this is what the broad things should be. So I think India, being the first mover, is on its way to calibrate and learn and on the go. But for other countries, it's a clear model to say that, hey, you have to adopt it in stages. You have to first understand the tech, but you also have to understand the right governing principles to roll, because all these handle a lot of sensitive data. And at the same time, I think India has also learned. So our initial approach was for a central database, which is what Aadhaar is still. But now if you look at every new policy, every new digital public infrastructure that is being created is through a federated data model. The very education digital architecture framework, something which is the Ministry of Education has just released. Now, their paper argues that we have to follow the principle of subsidiarity, and we have to collect data at that stage which needs to be used for a particular purpose. So it is a completely federated architecture mandated by India 2.0, which is the MIT's guidelines on the data architecture. So I think India is also learning, and how, like, as this global conversation is building up, we're also learning. We're seeing how Estonia is doing. We're seeing how Europe is trying to do with IDES, or how France is doing with France Connect with the digital ID. So I think it's a global conversation that is happening, and I think it will be a reciprocation of we learn certain privacy tips and tricks from them, and they learn the tech and the scale from us.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree broadly. I think the fact that, I mean, if we have a first mover advantage, there's also a first mover disadvantage where we just don't know, right? Like what frameworks of privacy or data protection would work with DP, right? So because we were the first ones, or at least to deploy it at such a large scale, and in a country, as you said, Ritul, which is resource constrained or it is poor relatively. So what works and what doesn't work had to be figured out, like on the go. So at least the one advantage that rest of the countries or the new adopters of DPI have is that they can learn from India's experience, where like we did trial and error, we had a few ups and downs, but that now the system is so robust that like we can export it with confidence. And also, if you see the example of just even Aadhaar, it came under intense scrutiny from like NGOs and some activists. But now we more or less, I think everyone accepts that the idea, the implementation, all of them has like made change in the lives of Indians, right? The whole DBT like ecosystem, and then the JAM Trinity, all of that happened because of the robust system like Aadhaar. So you're right. I think we will learn on the go. We have learned on the go. We will still learn on the go. And I think some criticism, although coming from a place of, like concern, but it usually sometimes tends to forget that, you are also doing something that is very new and very, like, has not been tried before. So you have to do a few things before you figure out what works and what doesn't.
Right. I think the absence of the data protection framework while all of this was being deployed kind of led to all of these concerns. And, and when you're the first one to build all of these things out, there are a lot of learnings that happen while you're doing these things. So before we proceed, let's take a quick break, and then we can come back and talk about some of the approaches to globalize India's DPI and take it from there. So welcome back. And so we've been talking about globalizing India's DPI. What does India stand to gain from it? And now we look at some of the approaches to globalizing India's DPI. So Saurabh, you had mentioned earlier that IMF and World Bank can play a role in funding the infrastructure that's being deployed in certain countries, or they can be partnerships with other countries like Australia or the US in to identify maybe some complementary advantages that India and these countries have to roll it out and help other countries adopt it as well. Ritul, would you like to add anything to these things? Are there any other approaches being considered in how India's DPI could be adopted globally?
Bharath, how I look at internationalizing, and I'm taking a step back, like internationalizing India's digital public infrastructure is through multiple levels. One is, of course, India Stack Global, where we say that, hey, boss, this bouquet of solution is ready for the world. And I think this was launched in Digital India something in January, and a lot of countries have actually sent requests and inquired about it. And second is, of course, as Saurabh mentioned, that the World Bank and these other UN entities can say that, hey, this is India's solution. We support it. It's tried, tested. It's like a foolproof solution. These countries can implement, and these countries can sort of then give that downstream funding to actually implement it at scale. And that's already been happening. Like the World Bank runs this one of the biggest ID project in the world, where they're supporting some 50 odd countries to build their digital ID. That's called ID for D. And that actually comes, the World Bank brings a lot of teams to come to Aadhaar and study in Philippines, where they're building this PhilSys digital ID. It's based out of MOSIP, and they've come to actually study Aadhaar Act and like how Aadhaar did it. So of course, bank and these entities are one way to go about it. But at the same time, I also feel that India is also trying to internationalize it through building a sort of global narrative around it. Of course, G20 presidency is one big way of actually doing it. Through it is a priority across working groups, be it under the Sherpa track or under the finance track. Finance track, GPFI, the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, talks about how you can do financial inclusion through digital public infrastructure. Health working group talks about how you can leverage digital public goods to transform healthcare in a particular country. Agriculture working group talks about how DPIs can be leveraged to study for improving agri market conditions or like studying climate, etc. And of course, the digital economy working group, which says that DPI is a way to transform your digital economy. That is the that's the next gen roads and railways that are going to run your digital economy. We are also sort of doing this internationalization through a lot of events that we are doing and we are hosting and participating. I think Nandan Nilekani is wanted all across the world. I don't know how many people I personally knew were in DC for this World Bank IMF spring meetings, and digital public infrastructure was the most important conversation. So I think this speaks a lot about which like India really driving important conversations at the most important stage. It is in the UN Secretary General statements every time. African healthcare, the CDC, the African health strategy that was released, it explicitly says that digital public goods, digital public infrastructure approach is needed, and we need to learn from the India approach of doing it. So I think we are doing it through a lot of sort of text, a lot of articles, a lot of events that we are hosting through that. So, and one essential thing which I think has happened, and again, like internationalizing the India's digital public infrastructure effort, is that a lot of global efforts have suddenly converged now to support this digital public infrastructure. IMF wrote quite a comprehensive paper on the India stack. OECD just did a paper on digital IDs and interoperability of digital IDs. So, and of course, like they all have a very strong mention to Aadhaar, etc. UNDP is doing a bunch of digital public infrastructure programs. That is so, and then of course, Digital Impact Alliance, Digital Public Goods Alliance. So all these entities are suddenly coming together. ID4D, G2PX, the ID4D and G2PX are World Bank efforts. So all these entities are suddenly coming to it. And the thread that ties all their efforts is the India's approach. So now they're supporting India's approach, they're building the literature around it, they're propagating it, they're taking it to the most important conversations. So I think it's an amalgamation of a lot of things happening, which is contributing to internationalizing India's digital public infrastructure. Of course, like India Stack Global is one way where we offer these solutions, and then Bank and UN is the one way where we deploy these solutions. But I think there are also other ways where we are actually sort of taking it on the global center stage.
And that seems to be a very, comprehensive, like all kind of approaches are being utilized to disseminate this technology to other countries. So finally, I think let's bring this all together, and any concluding thoughts that you have on how we see this playing out, anything that you would like to say to bring this conversation to a close. Ritul, would you like to go first?
I think my friend Saurabh will be better able to answer the geopolitics of it. But I want to understand that how we would see China, Russia, US, and of course EU, all of them coming under one umbrella to support it. Because I still feel a lot of countries don't have clear understanding of it. So how will they endorse, support, etc.? But I'm hoping that India, like my optimistic hope is that India will receive some big gains out of it. And it could be India leading the global effort. It could be India building a sort of big entity. I don't know. I'm really curious that how India actually culminates all this cross-presidency effort and takes it somewhere. I'm also really hoping that in the SDG summit that's going to happen this year in September, I think this is going to be the most important thing, that for the next 7 years, if we have to double down on something, it is digital public infrastructure. And the next stage of it will be how we make it interoperable across borders. Of course, Saurabh mentioned that PayNow and UPI already linked, but I'm curious that how digital IDs, how SingPass and Aadhaar can be linked, how we're going to do a UPI with more such other payment system, Prompt Pay, Pix, etc. So I'm curious to do it. And I'm also, like the last step I'm also curious to see how the West is going to react to all of this. Because they struggled a lot in pandemic. I've met friends personally who said that in US they were writing checks and they were all in mailboxes, no idea to track where these checks are. So how the West is going to react to it? Are they going to look to adopt? But it's also going to be really contentious. A unique digital ID in the West is really that'll raise alarms in that country. So are they going to DPI-fy their existing solution, which is what a lot of countries are doing? The Trust Framework ID is making existing IDs interoperable through a platform. So France Connect is one way, etc. A bunch of things. So are they going to make more of it? And so I'm just curious that these bunch of things, how the West is going to do it, how everyone will come under this big umbrella, and how this will be the next big thing for sustainable development goals.
Yeah, I think in terms of geopolitics, the beauty of DPI is that, it is open. So, I think the idea is that one of the benefit that India can get out of this making Indian DPI global is the fact that, there is also some appetite in the global community to not get bogged down too much by either the Chinese companies or US companies, right? There obviously are dependencies which you can't avoid, and which, being like part of the global economy, you can't avoid. But having like a digital public infrastructure which is more cooperative, which is more open, might give some maneuvering space to countries, and which I am hoping also, actually, it's a hope, let's see if it fructifies, is that it would prevent the global public infrastructure ecosystem to not be, bifurcated between, the West and the non-West, or, the democratic and these binaries are something, which pose a huge risk, because then these can actually make things worse by forcing countries to choose between two models. And in terms of interoperability, obviously, payment services is the lowest hanging fruit, right? Because people travel all over the world, and then we already have a robust financial exchange system. So to have like cross-border payments become very easy, and you be able to do that anywhere would reduce costs, would give fillip to tourism, and I think would be a win-win situation for all the parties involved. I would say, at the end, I would say, like, I would still be a bit more cautious about extending this to like other things, like Aadhaar interoperability with some other countries, national ID system, because again, national ID systems are very, they're very closely guarded kind of secrets, and like I would be a bit more skeptical, if countries would be more open to sharing that. Maybe like passports. We already have passport protocols, in place to do that. So that's that. And one more thing actually is that the question you raised, Ritul, regarding. I think it might be a bit more difficult for developed countries to implement DPI, because that would imply that they will have to start, like they have to bring down the things that they already have and then replace it with a new thing, which is usually a bit more difficult than, let's say, developing countries or the global south countries, where they are trying to leapfrog from one place to another. So I think that India's target, at least initially, should be the countries of the global south, which have the need, which have the drive, and they also have the kind of, they have no other option but to leapfrog, right, to fulfill their SDG goals and not. So yeah, I'm hopeful. Let's see what happens. There's too much that can happen in next few years. So I am hopeful and optimistic.
Just to add to the caution, Saurabh, when I said I meant it like interoperability, I'm looking at a 10-year horizon or a 5-year horizon, where I'm seeing that how these mega systems are going to talk to each other. Of course, payment is a low-hanging fruit, because like we want something that goes beyond SWIFT and it's faster, safer, secure, etc. And it's like can be used for a smaller amount of payments, all these things. But like ID, data exchanges, etc. I'm looking is a DFFT, free flow, cross-border data flow is like at a long-term horizon when like DPI has matured as a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How are countries going to talk about, let's say, interoperability of these fundamental foundational systems? That
makes sense. Yeah,
Immediately, I completely agree that there's no way that we're going to talk about this. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, guys. So I think we can agree that a robust DPI, widely adopted across the world, presents opportunities for both, innovation, economic growth, and all of these things, and achieving the sustainable development goals much faster. So it'll be a great opportunity also to develop standards, best practices, and lessons that we can learn from each other. So it'll be really interesting to see how all this plays out in the coming years. So yeah. Looking forward to seeing how this plays out. Thanks everyone for listening to us, and hope you enjoyed this, and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Bharath. Thanks, Saurabh. It was amazing.
Thanks, both. It was great.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.